what I like to preach to agencies every day, which is that your intellectual property is your most significant asset as an agency after your people. The win here was our ability to have a front row seat to helping this client protect the IP as it was created, both in trademark form, copyright form, and licensing form, all of which had specific price tags ascribable to it because they've been able to package this in different ways to different audiences for additional revenue streams. And this is on top of the fee for service work that they still do serving clients directly. So it's my favorite story about leveraging IP for creating a platform of wealth for agencies. Just it's been an honor walking like step by step with them and helping them, protect it one asset at a time and leverage it one asset at a
Right.
time.
They said getting started was the hardest part, but no one told you how hard it is to scale a custom service business. It's time for your team to step up, but your clients want you. Discover how to scale to 7 figures and beyond by freeing up time and getting your team to run whole parts of the company so you can focus on scaling profits. This is the Hands Off CEO with Mandi Ellefson.
Hi, this is Mandi Ellefson, host of the Hands Off CEO podcast. Today on our show, I have Sharon Toerek, and she is the founder and CEO of Toerek Law, and they are a national law firm focusing on intellectual property and marketing law for marketing and communications agencies nationwide. And Sharon is also the former president of AAF in Cleveland, Ohio, and a member of the 4A legal consultant panel. And she's also a frequent speaker on agency legal issues at Counselors Academy and other industry events like Inbound and Content Marketing World, AMI, and Build a Better Agency. And I am so excited to have Sharon on this because she is really one of the world's best experts on legal issues for marketing and communications agencies. So welcome to the show, Sharon. It's nice to have you.
Thank you, Mandi. It's good to be here and good to be chatting with you again. It's been too long.
I know, but I'm glad to have you back because one of the things I invited Sharon to come on the show today because I wanted to hear about the kind of results and really some case studies that they're most proud of, because I think that we don't oftentimes, I know your work, a lot of the work that you do is behind the scenes. It's confidential, and you can't always come right out on your website and say, these are the things these are the kind of breakthroughs that we're having. And I'd still like to go there today and see what we can do. And I want to talk about the kind of breakthroughs that you're creating for your clients, so that so the agencies can really understand the value of engaging in legal services like yours and how they can protect themselves. And also it's the kind of interesting things that they may not have been able to do otherwise.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I always feel like we start or approach dealing with a client and the situation they present it to us, whether it's an opportunity they want to take advantage of or whether it's a problem they need help solving. Our goal is to get them to a better future, however they define it. Sometimes that means making a good deal. Sometimes that means, solving a problem that's occurred in, serving their clients or in dealing internally with a business issue. And so I like to, start from the desired result and work the problem backwards. And that's pretty much how we approach serving agencies, whether it's, any of our 3, what I call buckets, whether it's IP, whether it's contract development and negotiation, whether it's marketing regulation related. Where do you want to go? What's your idea of a good future? And how do we use what we can do to help you get there?
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to just hear an example of a breakthrough that you're really proud of, that you with a client that you've worked with. And I know that some of these things are confidential, so feel free to make them anonymous or whatever you need to do to be able to tell the story.
Yeah. So I guess I'm going to start with what I nerd out on, and what sort of brought me into working with marketers in the agency community. in the first place. And those are intellectual property wins, what I'll call intellectual property wins. My favorite two examples of client wins regarding their intellectual property are going to be probably a little unexpected, maybe for folks listening. One is an example of someone with a whose agency developed a deep and industry-wide acknowledged area of expertise, who then took that zone of genius and created a lot of tangible intellectual property around it. And this is, think of it as one aspect of it being a train the trainer model. Think of it as being setting industry standards for certain aspects of the work that they do, that their peers, sort of ascribe to or strive to reach. And they have monetized that IP by leveraging it to create new product lines, new services, new. They have built community around it and monetized the community, and it is just a sterling example of what I like to preach to agencies every day, which is that your intellectual property is your most significant asset as an agency after your people. And most agencies don't think of it that way because they look at it as more of an inventory of stuff to sell, that will have an expire date after the client has, received the deliverables, paid the bill, and then they're on to creating the next thing. And really, there's gold in there. And so, the win here was our ability to have a front row seat to helping this client protect the IP as it was created, both in trademark form, copyright form, and licensing form, all of which had specific price tags ascribable to it because they've been able to package this in different ways to different audiences for additional revenue streams. And this is on top of the fee for service work that they still do serving clients directly. So it's my favorite story about leveraging IP for creating a platform of wealth for agencies. And I like to use it as a case study of why other agencies should look harder at this for themselves, beyond the custom work and the fee for hire work that they do day to day, agency to client. So I'd say
Right.
that's one big win that for that client that I love to point out. And just it's been an honor walking like step by step with them and helping them, protect it one asset at a time and leverage it one asset at a
Right.
time. Yeah.
And what, so let's talk about the value of the company. Like, and you might not have access to this information, but how does that actually impact the sellable value of the company by
Well, I
putting those
mean,
things in place?
yeah, it's hard to say to put exact dollars on it, but I will say this. When you, as an agency, build your IP portfolio up, um, you may get to a point where you don't want to run the agency day to day anymore, and you find a good buyer for that, whether that's somebody internal to the agency or whether you find a third party buyer. We're seeing, equal bits of both scenario these days out in the market. Um, Maybe you don't want to sell the IP. Maybe you want to allow that agency to continue to use it. So you're happy to license it to them to use to implement out in the marketplace. But maybe you also want to license it to other consulting firms or agencies, or continue to leverage it yourself in some way. So it's not only that not only creates more value for the enterprise if you want to sell the entire enterprise because there's dual revenue streams coming in, but it's also creating wealth in that it's giving more options to the selling
Right.
owners of the agency because there's more assets there and they don't have to all go in one direction. There can be multiple buyers or you can keep some, sell some. So it's increasing your options and it's going to increase your multiple if you want to sell the whole package, in my view and in my experience based on what I've seen.
I love what you just shared there because and this is, by the way, is a model that we are moving towards as well. Like at Hands Off CEO, as we're continuing to scale, and our IP it's our really most valuable asset in the company.
Yep.
And there's a lot of things that you can do with that. And I love how you shared that you can have your company, you can sell the income producing stream, still license your IP, retain your IP, and be able to take that with you and go wherever you want with that afterwards. Is that
Right.
what I'm hearing right?
Yeah, entirely. I mean, it increases your options and it increases your value, right, as an
And
enterprise.
one of the things I love about that too is that it built to sell. One of the things that they were sharing on their podcast is nearly all CEOs after founders after they go and sell their company,
Hmm.
they they have this big dip, and many of them actually regret it. They regret
Yeah.
selling. Now, if you were able to take the piece of the company that you loved and be able to take that to the next generation and bring it to the next level and be able to sell, it would seem to me like you're getting best of the both worlds.
Yeah, and I've seen it's a great point, and I've seen a number of scenarios wherein the founder seller um, still wants to go out there and wants to get back to the ability to maybe counsel brands one on one again. And they don't have to worry about scale anymore because they've already scaled and maximized the value of that, and they're in a different place usually in their personal journey and their professional journey. And so, a lot of them, that's enticing to them. They've built this body of knowledge and now they can be a practitioner again if they want to. And they've got the benefit of having made the sale as well as the ability to get back to maybe what drew them to the business in the first place. And whether that's using the IP to deliver that or whether that's because you've got the revenue streams resulting from the IP you've created, it just gives you more options. And yeah, there's a lot of seller's remorse. In my experience, it lasts for varying amounts of time. Not everybody's remorseful equally so, or for the same amount of time after the transaction. But it's a thing. It is really a thing for sure.
Mm.
Um,
Well, and to go down this path a little bit more too, um, the most valuable thing you can do in your business is actually be investing in the IP around how are you generating results for clients, not
yeah.
just the systems and processes, but the results. Because increasingly AI is able to come up with information, but it's not necessarily the same thing as this is our tried and true system to be able to generate these results under these conditions.
Hmm.
And when you have that, that's really valuable IP. That's actually one of the things that we do with our clients that is the key foundation to be able to scale. It's the foundation to be able to do what you're talking about with the unique ways with the IP, and add value to the company. But it's also how you can be able to sell more effectively, because when you're clear on what that invisible advantage is when your company, when you can turn that into an irresistible offer, that's what you build your IP around that as you're going, and then you can license it like what you're talking about on all the other
Right.
different creative vehicles.
Right. And one of the other opportunities, one story shares that I'll give to you is also regarding IP, but a much different vein. We are sticklers about drilling into the agencies we work with about the necessity of addressing the proper timing of IP transfer in your client agreements. And we can
Mm.
start to sound like broken records, on most agencies fundamentally get it that they either need to make a strategic decision that they're going to invest some of their IP in the business development process and leave it at risk, right? Because the prospect demands to see some capabilities demonstrations or whatever. And if you've decided to do that and it's intentional, then I respect it. But and if you haven't decided to do it, then there are ways for you to safeguard yourself. But what I'm talking about is once you've actually decided to get married to the client, you are going to do business together. You're past the biz dev phase of the conversation. We have seen um, tremendous success for one agency in particular, wherein remembering to document the proper transfer timing of the intellectual property they created, which the client was intended to own, and they, did own at the end of the day, but they hadn't paid the agency. They owe the agency not quite six figures, but close to it. Um, they stopped paying. And this agency we were able to use the IP position they had because no money, no transfer, um, to resolve that payment dispute. It probably would have taken a year or longer for them to get their money. Um, and use the intellectual property rights as leverage to get them paid, which they should have already been paid anyway. The
Right.
contract provided that they should have been paid, but they weren't being paid. And so the ability to say to a former client, hey, you don't own this work. This work is out there and you have started to implement it, but you're not really allowed to do it. And we'll take it back and we'll also disable some of it because it happened to be digital in some aspects, and until you pay your bill. And we were able to get full payment. We didn't even have to negotiate a compromise on the amount that was owed. So I like to share that story because not every agency can envision themselves actually having to fight with the client about
Right.
money and use IP as leverage to do it. Most of them are focused on other parts of the contract that they can use to try to work out a resolution. So um, that's a win that I think agencies should keep in the back of their mind, is they're remembering that your master service agreement really needs to speak to who's going to own the IP and when is the client going to own the part of it that's intended for them to own.
Got it. So then what about in that case if the client like made up an excuse like we're not happy with that. That's really common. Like we're not happy with it. We don't want to pay for the rest of the contract. You already done the work, but we're not happy.
Yeah.
So would that change the leverage on that?
Well, I mean, it changes it. It doesn't necessarily mean you have less, but it takes the conversation from an IP conversation to a contract negotiation question. Then you have to look to other parts of the agreement to see what leverage the agency has to enforce its right to collect. So there's, the actual description of the work to be done, the performance guarantees, if there are any, timelines, all of that stuff. And then so you have to rely on the traditional elements of the agreement, which is fine. But if you've got the leverage of the IP position on top of that, it can make the conversation go a lot faster for the agency.
About what percentage of agencies would you say are operating with service agreements that are hurting them?
That are hurting them. I don't know. What I find is that's an interesting question. I don't know if I can quantify. I know you're a numbers girl, Mandy. I don't know if I can put a number on it. But I would say that most of the agencies that come to us who have some inkling that their master service agreement needs to level up, um, end up with new agreements entirely because it's just more
Mhm.
efficient to start from a fresh place than to try to, um, to wedge good language into an agreement where it won't fit organically.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well,
Um,
and I think this is a really important conversation about the kind of agreements you need to have in place, because when you have the right agreements in place, there's like this balance between
yeah,
probably protecting the company, but also using language that's not going to turn anybody off, turn off your best prospects, right?
yeah,
Your best clients, right? So there's this balance. But if it's beefy enough, then if God forbid you bring on one of those clients that is looking for something for nothing, and then they're the kind of people who don't pay bills, and they're trying to get refunds and things like this happens every now and then, right? With
mhm,
even when you do everything you can in your agency, and you still have those clients that that have fallen on financial challenges and then want to go after you on it.
mhm.
um so I am seeing on one side of it is the importance of having good language that's going to protect you, so that they're going to be looking at those contracts and say, we don't have a leg to stand on here, and that might even prevent them from actually going and pursuing you legally. Are you seeing that with your clients?
Well, I think what we see, you know, I would advise any agency working with us or who asked me, even if we weren't working with them, if you're already seeing potential friction at the possibility of presenting an agreement that is committing no other crime than it's comprehensive,
Yeah.
we certainly don't. want to present agreements on behalf of the agencies we work with that look unfair or hard to understand or tricky. That's not the goal. The goal
Right.
is let's be transparent about what the rules of the road are going to be and how we're going to resolve a problem if it occurs, and what are our benchmarks and what are our standards when it comes to the various issues that our typical contract is going to address. And so if you're getting pushback or friction, I always have to, and I've heard this a million times from agencies. We don't want to look difficult to do business
Mhm.
with. We want a contract that's no more than X pages long because clients just get frustrated with, well, maybe you're working with the wrong clients, or
Mhm.
maybe you need, and this is frequent, and we do this for lots of our agencies, maybe you need more than one version of your contract. Maybe we routinely create multiple versions of a client services contract for client. One is the full master service agreement. That's for your higher dollar or your longer term client relationships. Um, and also like a short form version of your terms and conditions. And that's the kind of thing that is good for a short term project or a lower dollar value engagement. And it's also language that you might be able to slap into the middle of a proposal or an estimate so that and then that's your contract. And
Mhm.
so everybody has to decide what style works best for them. But what I think is fair is that you want to use the instrument that makes the most sense for what you sell and how you sell it and how much you sell it for. So you don't want to over lawyer or overkill the conversation. But I also think that agencies use that as kind of a crutch to say, because they don't want to be responsible for the ones creating a good set of benchmark documents. What we also hear a lot is, well, we do business with enterprise sized companies or government agencies, or they're never going to sign our agreement. And that's the kind of businesses we want to work with. Okay. Um, First of all, in my experience, that's not true that they'll never sign your agreement. There are
Mhm.
lots of exceptions to that. And secondly, even if they are going to require that you do the deal on their paperwork, having your own well thought out master agreement means you've got your benchmarks pre decided. You know what issues matter to you and what your positions on those issues are. It is your built in checklist for how to review any agreement that any brand puts in front of you if that's what you decide to do. And then on your question of, offense versus defense is kind of how I would categorize it,
Mhm.
is we don't want to offend, but we also want to be able to defend ourselves in case the client wants to use performance or some other, I don't know, ginned up argument to not pay us. A good contract is going to create very clear set of expectations about what will happen if either party doesn't, hold up their end of the relationship. And that's usually on the client side, it's either I'm paying on time or at all, or it's being timely in providing feedback, recommendations, approvals that the agency needs to keep the project moving. Those are usually
Mhm.
the areas where clients stumble. And then, where agencies are claimed to stumble is that's as variable as the clients they work with might be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Well, what question did I not ask what you wish I would have asked?
Well, I think we should talk about what are agencies asking most about these days when it comes to risk management and protecting themselves and being proactive versus reactive. So I will tell you that we're spending a lot of time helping agencies put risk management protocols in place for AI, for managing AI. And that means making sure that they address using generative AI in their client agreements, in their independent contractor and vendor agreements, and they're creating written policies for the agencies to use internally and externally about how they use AI. So that is a key area where I'm getting lots of questions about and spending a good bit of time advising clients around.
Why is that
Um,
important to have that in agreement?
Because you need the client to acknowledge that the agency is using AI, and many brands are still a little bit slow to adopt. Um, and so you want an understanding and you want it reflected that the client understands the agency is going to use AI. You want a clear articulation that nobody can own the intellectual property in any work that is generated out of AI. You may own rights to the human stuff that gets added to it, but not to the underlying output of any machine. You want the clients sign off on that because, right, they're going to be expecting all the rights. Well, you don't get the rights that we don't have, so we've got to address that.
Mm.
And also the liability and indemnification around using or implementing AI developed or created works into the deliverables. If you create, let's just use an example of if you create an ad campaign that uses copy or imagery that AI was um, relied upon to help generate, and it ends up being incorrect. There was a hallucination in it, so the product information is wrong, or it infringes on somebody else's copyright or trademark. Um, there's going to be a difficult conversation in between client and agency about liability there. So you want to address that in the contract. And so AI creates, a small set of its own things that need to be dealt with in the client and agency services agreement. Similarly, with an independent contractor, if you're an agency who has made certain commitments around AI to your client, you want to make sure that the contractor you're using isn't violating any of those understandings. And so it's something that has to be dealt with, all throughout the chain of agreements. So
Yeah.
that's AI is one area. I'd say, the other thing we're seeing an uptick, two other areas we're seeing an uptick in activity. Agency to agency strategic alliances. So agencies
Mhm.
teaming together to serve a common client, whether it's white label or whether they're actually both sitting at the table with the client. Definite uptick in those transactions. And then third, just M&A activity in the small agency marketplace has definitely ratcheted up over the last 24 months. And so whether that is, an internal transaction because the owner has decided that's their succession plan and they're ready to move on, move out, or whether it is, some owners saying, I've been through a recession, a pandemic, and I am
I'm
not
ready.
up for a third round of turbulence with this economy or with AI causing so many challenges so it's time for me to sell. And so to a strategic third party buyer. So those are probably some of the freshest things we're getting asked about by agencies on the daily as legal
Wow.
advisors to the community.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. So there's quite a big for the M&A, there's quite a big of movement for people wanting to leave their agency because they're just done with all the turbulence.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a groundswell, but I would say that if you are an agency owner, on the cusp, that the current environment has made it a lot easier for them to decide that, it's time for a new chapter. I also think that some of this is just look. If you look at where the demographics are, there's a lot of agency builders, entrepreneurs who have built agencies who, are approaching succession planning age, and it's just
Right.
demographics. It's not anything economic or societal. It's just that's where we are, and so they either have to look for strategic third parties, or they got to look at the next gen of leadership within their agencies who might be ready to take the reins and figure out a way to transition the business over to them that's fair to everybody.
Got it. And are
Yeah.
you seeing other opportunities being placed with the M&A? I guess you pretty much said that there's more opportunities in in the aging and then also acquiring other agencies too if you're looking to stack it up because of some companies just wanting to get out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of those things, and I think, like I said, some of this is predictable because of demographics, in my opinion, and I think also there's a lot of dynamic forces working together at the same time that affect the fortunes of agency. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
There's never been a better opportunity to be creative, but it's also daunting, and it's really starting from square one in some areas of the business. And so, um, it makes some owners, I think, ask questions about their readiness, maybe sooner than they might. But I don't know. I don't have a needle or a beat on what the primary driver of it is. I think it's more than one thing. What I do
Okay.
know is that we're seeing many more of these transactions now than we probably were 24 months ago, amongst the smaller and mid-sized agencies too.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's always very interesting. I'd love to hear what other experts are seeing flowing through their workflow and through the agencies that they're working with. So thank you for sharing that. So,
Yeah.
um, all right, Sharon, if there are agencies or communication companies that would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back, Manny. It's been great talking with you again. You can reach me at legalandcreative.com. Also, join me over on the Innovative Agency podcast. We just passed 300 episodes. So I'm proud to say that we've had 300 awesome conversations with people in the agency community. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. And so you can find me, Sharon Toerek, Toe, like toe, REK, on LinkedIn. And I'm really responsive to messages there too. So I'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. So we'll put this in the show notes. It was really great to have you again on the show, Sharon. And thanks again for sharing all your brilliance.
Thanks, Mandy. Great to be here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Hands Off CEO with Mandi Ellefson. If you want to work less and make more, make sure you subscribe and get a new episode every week, and help spread the word by leaving a review.